No, I'll give you that.
Oh, excellent. I didn't know that. Pre-Christmas goodie.
Right, I'm just turning the microphone. I've got it.
Morning everyone, and welcome to Strategy, Finance and Risk Committee meeting of Monday, 5th of December 2022. Just a reminder to everyone in terms of health and safety, if the alarm rings out the nearest exit, we should probably just door it back here across the road and we assemble across the road and wait for staff to bring us back in. There seems to be an echo still here.
Yeah.
Someone's got a mic on. Right. Someone's unmuted. Still there. Just be aware.
Off-putting actually when you're talking and you hear your voice coming back. But anyway, just be aware that this meeting's being live streamed, video publicly available on YouTube. Remind everyone to turn their phones onto silent or turn them off. And we'll get Shad, if you could start us with a karakia, please.
Morena tātou, tuatahi ka tuku mihi kia koutou, kia tātou anō, kia koera Anne, Māori, kuruatahi, I whakahaere nei tēnei o tō tātou nei hui. He kira kia koutou kua tai nei I tēnei ata, tēnā koutou. Nō reira, me tīmata tātou, me tuku karakia kia pāhaere tēnei o tō tātou nei hui, nō reira kia noi tātou. Pea atua anei mātou e koropiko nei mū tōroro, ka tuku ngā whakamoemeti, ngā whakawhetai ki a koe, mau mena ki tanga katoa. Mana ki tia rā tātou katoa I ngā hutangi ngā take e hora nei. Kia whaihua rahi tika mā tātou me ki rā te hāpuri whānui. Nō reire te atua tēnei mā tūne tēnei ki a koe, korore ki tōnga tapu. Āmene.
Thanks, Shad. So we have apologies today from Bruce Robertson, but he has left some speaking notes, which he's happy that I add into the meeting. And Tapio is going to be a few minutes late. So would someone like to move those, if we receive those apologies? Bill and Wayne, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried, thank you. We have no one booked for the public forum. We have no late items, I don't think, no. There's no business to be transferred from public excluded into open. There is a change to the order of business. So can someone explain to me what this is? 9.8. Oh, right, okay. So 9.8 and 9.9. So the way we're going to run the meeting this morning, we'll run through the main agenda. When we get to 9.8, we will adjourn and we will go into public excluded, and then we will come back and resume in a workshop mode for 9.8 and 9.9. Correct? Good. Everyone happy with that? Thank you.
The meeting will still be live streamed. We had an option of either suspending standing orders or through the chair to have a more free and frank discussion.
I think the idea is that we have the workshop, but we have it in open, so it is being live streamed, and we'll suspend standing orders. Actually, I'd forgotten we have a standing order. You're only allowed to speak once, and I don't enforce it, but we'll do it properly, and we will have a motion. Just remind me. It's in the run sheet. Good. Okay. So that brings us to confirmation of minutes of the Strategy, Finance and Risk Committee meeting held on the 14th of November. Is there any issues, any changes, corrections that anyone wants to make to those minutes? No? Someone prepared to move that it's a true and correct record of the meeting? Stephen and Bill, thank you. The only thing I want to raise out of them is the Kindergarten Association came and made a reasonably forceful presentation to us. Can I suggest that in the new year we organise a meeting with the association to talk through some of the issues that they raised and how we can work together for the future? Right? It's not urgent at the moment, but next year will be fine. Okay, I'll put that then. All those in favour of the minutes being a true and correct record, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? Bill?
Thanks, Chair. Not so much a conflict of interest, but I did want it noted for the sake of clarity that I have family members who have a property in the Keenan Road growth area. So I just want that recorded. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the 6-monthly Treasury update. And we've got Paul, Cherie, Catherine, and welcome Suresh, who's on Zoom with us.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you and good morning. So I might just to quickly introduce the paper. So this is our regularly 6-month Treasury strategy update. Suresh is going to give a little bit of an overview of what's going on in the world. And then I'll hand over to Cherie to actually just talk through some of the more detail in the report. Thank you.
Sorry, am I able to have my screen sharing?
You should be able to share.
It's just saying disabled, sorry. Host disabled.
Oh, I shall make you a co-host.
Oh, here we go, I think. Please let me know if you can see all this.
Yes, we can.
Oops. Right, there we go. Okay, thank you. Right, I will try to be as brief as possible. It's a pretty simple theme at the moment. Inflation, obviously these are some key CPI figures, and it's continuing to remain very, very elevated. There is one slight consolation. We are not suffering inflation as they are in the UK and Europe, which have hit double digits. But what's important to note here is we are starting to see a peak or an end, particularly in the US, which has already started to come back. Now, in New Zealand, these are the quarterly September updates for our inflation print. And the key headlines remain food, housing, construction, and household utility costs, and of course, transport. Transport had a very, very late boost, and what we noted there was a significant rise in air travel costs, and a combination of those three are the key drivers at the moment for our inflation story. Now, the problem is the Reserve Bank thinks we're not over with inflation. And in fact, you can see here on their chart, which is this light blue line, they still see inflation peaking, continuing to rise into next year. So that's their problem. Now, of course, all the way through last year, everybody has mispriced inflation, including the Reserve Bank, and they've just had to keep chasing it higher. And now they think it's going to continue into next year. Now, one of the key reasons why they believe this and why they can see inflation coming is expectations. So out there, most businesses are looking to put up their prices. And this chart shows that where people or businesses think in 2 or 5, and in particular 1 year's time, where inflation is where it's coming from. So this is the bit that scares the Reserve Bank, is that everybody out there is going, well, we're just going to keep putting up prices. Now, the key reason they are putting up prices is wages, and we do have a wage price spiral playing out at the moment, and so do every other country in the world, or the major ones. UK, understandable with what's going on there, and they've got quite high inflation priced. Euro area is quite stable. US and Canada very much on the same tack. But when you look down here with Australia and New Zealand, it seems that New Zealand is outperforming Australia when it comes to wages. And, you know, we've overtaken them. And if you reflect in here, and this chart really shows 10 years of data, since the GFC, our wages haven't moved a lot, where in Australia, wages have outperformed. And so you could argue that they've had all this quite strong wage prices, inflation through multiple years, but at the moment, we're outperforming. Now, this is the Reserve Bank's projections, and this is what worries them more so. And here they've compared back to where they thought wage pressures were going to come back in August, in their August MPS, and where it is now at the latest November MPS. And they see wages a little over 5.5% into next year. And this is what they're trying to cap with these ongoing OCR increases. Now, we have split, and that's the key difference between us and Australia, is that we have more upside in wages, and this is what Reserve Bank's going to attack. Now, on a positive note, these are our key migration data. The purple line, obviously, a key focus, and since COVID and the pandemic, you know, we went to zero or negative almost. And we have seen work visas increase, but we're not back to levels that we saw before the pandemic. Worryingly is the student numbers, because, you know, I think from a broader economic perspective, our education sector is quite large, and they have not seen a rebound in students coming back. And in fact, you know, that's very low, that yellow line at the bottom. Now, what this means in terms of forecast for inflation, these is a very, very busy chart, which shows all the, you know, economists, the banks, and including the Reserve Bank, which is the outlier. They're way up the top because they still see inflation holding high for a while, where everybody else thinks through 24 and into 25, we're going to get back into target. Now, why? Because the Reserve Bank has hiked and will keep hiking into early next year, and this should deliver the required medicine. But the Reserve Bank still is a bit of an outlier and still sees some upward pressure inflation, which is why they're continuing to push for higher OCR. Globally, these are some PMI purchasing managers indices. So these are quite a bellwether for what's in the pipeline for manufacturing. So this is a survey of all the factories around the world saying how much they've bought, how much steel they've procured, for example, to manufacture whatever they do. And above 50 is expansion, below 50 is contraction. And what you can see here is pretty much everybody is now into contraction. US is just clinging on there. Australia is still holding up quite high. But as we all know, they're a major supplier of commodities to the rest of the world. But there is a strong downward tilt in the manufacturing space. Services, PMIs, that's everything else. You'll note everybody is pretty much in contraction except New Zealand. Our data is lagging because it's quarterly, which is why our line certainly hasn't met the other lines yet. And this is worrying for the Reserve Bank because everybody's aware that as consumers, there's been a lot of spending going on, and it's still continued into the September quarter. Despite the hikes, interest rate hikes that have been kicking in, there's a lot of people still on quite low mortgages that are still sort of carrying on the way they have. And this is worrying for the Reserve Bank because they do want people to put their wallets away. Now, these are the central bank tightening expectations. So these are all the sort of the hiking cycles priced in over the next couple of years. As you can see, New Zealand is standout. We've still got a way to go, but we now have inversion. For example, that rates are going to be higher into next year, but then they're going to traject downwards because the market is now starting to price in cuts, and the cuts are being priced in because of the high risk of recession from next year. You'll note too, the red line, which is the US, is way lower now and has quite a stark inversion because they have delivered quite a number of hikes and they've, caught up. They were late to the party, but they've caught up. And then you look at the green line, which is Australia, which has had a very moderate kind of hiking cycle and are not going to sort of, strangle the situation. And they have been very gradual in their approach, where they therefore have a smoother profile that doesn't imply recession or an aggressive cutting cycle after they're finished. Similar for the European situation, which is the blue line. And of course, the Bank of Japan, we always put down there for reference because, they never get off zero. Quantum of our hikes, this sort of is one of my favorite charts. And this is every hiking and cutting cycle since the OCR was implemented in 1999. And what you can see here is what we're trying to achieve. This yellow area, which is still to come, is the most aggressive hiking cycle we've seen in certain living memory of most people, unless we go back to the 70s. So this is our reference point, is if we want to understand what's happening today, I think we have to refer back to what happened in the 70s. But even the cycle from 2006 to late 2008, which was about a 42-month cycle, we're doing this in 18 months. So very stark. These are the RBNZ's projections, and this just also confirms that they've been chasing their tail as well. So previous projections, were somewhere around 4. Now it's 5.5. So the Reserve Bank is saying we're going to get to 5.5, and then cuts are going to come. Now they're not predicting cuts very early. They're sort of from late 24, 25, because I think their view is they want to keep the cash rate high for a while to embed the pullback in spending. The ANZ have taken it even another notch higher, and they're saying a peak of 5.75. Swap rates. Now, this is quite an interesting chart because of the volatility we've had in markets in the last 6, 7, 8 months has been something we haven't seen for a long, long time. In any given month, you can see swap rates trade 1% range up and down, which just highlights the volatility and the unknowns and the uncertainty the markets are facing. And even today, so this was done on the 24th of November, which was timely after the Reserve Bank meeting, just how, and that's the dark blue line, how quickly it shot up, but equally how quickly now it's going back down towards lower swap rates once we reach these peaks. And in fact, this is even slightly outdated now because our 10-year swap rate is now back at 4.24, while our 2-year swap rate's up at 5%. So we've got a clear inversion playing out where the long end now is lower than the short end. Now, I do make a reference to that 10-year because that's important to Tauranga Council with some of the other things that are going on. And in particular, Paul, we'll just note that 10-year is now at 4.25. we've been having conversations and we've seen that 10-year at 550. And that just shows how much movement we're seeing in swap rates. This one again just shows, and these are the ANZ's projections of where the cash rate was going at any point. So if we look back a year ago, they thought we'd top out at 2%. And, you know, every month, pretty much, people, banks, etc., have just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed our forecast higher. And that's the comment we make up there: hike it until it breaks. And this is why we're seeing these extreme moves. We now have a cash rate, you know, projected to hit over 5. We've got basically, if you look at any bank, all their mortgage rates, I think floating rates are just under 8%. We have to go back 15 years to see rates like that. And all the fixed rate mortgages, I think, equally, you know, in the 6s and 7s. So yeah, pretty scary stuff for the household, I'm afraid. Moving ahead, this is the swap grid. This is a key focus for us when we address hedging and managing risk for Tauranga. And what we have been waiting for most of the year is for a clear inversion and where the end game is going to be. And this grid highlights it. It shows a 1-year swap is going to be about 517. So you could very, very expensive. 2-year back at 5, 10-year 423. But what's important for us, and I won't get into the technical aspects, is forward starts, is where swap rates will be in the future at a future starting date. And this grid is showing us that in 3 years' time, you will be able to do a swap for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. If you can see my mouse, under 4%, right? So what we're seeing now is the rate cuts starting to get priced into the curve. And this inversion implies two things: cuts will come and guarantee of a recession. Right, moving along. This one here, again, very, very important, and something we've focused on for a long time is what is the neutral rate for the cash rate, which is neither stimulatory or contractory. And what it shows is that the short run average for the cash rate is somewhere between 2.5% and 4%. And that on average, the cash rate would probably have to be around 2.5–3% at some point to remove for a neutral basis. Now, this neutral rate has over time continued to decrease as debt now becomes a major feature of households. And even if we look at what's happened in the last 2 years, since the pandemic, households have added 25%, nearly 25% more debt into their mortgage portfolios. And, you know, we need income, households need income to pay that. So a cash rate much above 2.5–3% is going to hurt. A cash rate at 4.5–5 is really going to hurt. Now, these couple of final slides just to finish off. The Reserve Bank's looking for an unemployment rate to go up. And these are its projections. So it's saying an unemployment rate at 3.3% is too tight. And, you know, that's where we are at the moment. Interestingly, it's where we sort of got to before the GFC back in 2007. And then we saw it take off, you know, quite a lot, up to 6.5. They don't think we're going to get that high this time, but it's going to be, you know, between 5, 5.5 and 6% is where they are projecting the unemployment to go in 2024. Now, that's a big jump from where they thought it was in August. And, you know, again, they're chasing their tail as well to get this inflation problem sorted. Another little chart I thought I'd put in there for interest is people keep referring to spending. And obviously, you know, we've just had these Black Friday sales, and that was a key focus for the Reserve Bank. And what this is now showing is we're still spending a lot of money, but we're getting less for it. And that's a no-brainer, right? All the prices of goods are up, so we are spending more money and getting less for it. And so this gap between volumes and values is actually quite important. And it's, you know, if we look, and this chart goes back about 8 years, we've never seen a gap like this before. And that's because everybody's putting up their prices. Couple of final ones. These are the tradable inflation areas that, you know, and this goes back to the GFC period as well. Transport, no brainer. The Ukraine problem, the pressures we've seen on oil and gas has seen that become a key component. And of course, oil goes into tractors and all that sort of thing, and that's put upward price pressure on food. So transport and food. And then the one more relevant to the council is construction. And so this is non-tradable, and household construction costs, which are these red bars that you can see. Look at how extended they are. We've never seen house price construction costs, general construction, I should say, too, at any point in this chart, which is about 15 years old. All other inflation is obviously tilting up as well. Rents, quite stable in my opinion, because there is a limit on what people can pay for rent, although they are up, but they're not up too much more than what we've seen over the last 15 years. But these housing construction costs are out of the park. So that's going to be, I think, going to be the challenge for the council. Just to sum up, we are around and above the midpoint of policy. You know, we've adopted that view for a long time because, remember, for the last 15 years, the only way interest rates have gone is down. But now we've got this massive problem. And inflation is the key driver. We are at the business end of the hikes. Next year, we're going to see the repercussions because we've seen the curves invert. We've seen the longer swap dates lower than the short ones, and recession is going to happen. And Adrian Orr and the Reserve Bank are looking for job cuts in the construction sector. I feel that has to be a benefit for local authorities because they have a lot in the pipeline, and hopefully some of that fallback in construction costs may feed in for the council into 2023, 2024. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much for that. I'm not sure whether I thank you, actually.
I know. I'm not a
Uh,
bearer of
any-
good news.
No, that's we're not blaming you. We're not holding you accountable. Any questions? We haven't got our financial wizard here, but I do have comments from Bruce, who said he was comfortable with the settings, particularly around the two strategies, setting out the fixed and hedged status on interest rates and its alignment with 1 July 2021, and also paragraph 6, the maturity profile.
I think, I'm sorry, he may have meant 1 July 24.
Yeah.
Just because that, again, for all councils remains a risk because we still don't know how much debt is going to disappear and what the implications are for hedging. You know, we're hearing potentially that the hedging will remain with councils, which would be good because that would lift our hedging profile within a lower debt framework. But that uncertainty will plague us for a while until we know what happens with Three Waters.
Right. Yep. I think you're right. Should have been 2024. Anything else? No. Thank you very much. It was pretty comprehensive.
Thank you.
Shireen, did you want to
drop out? Is that right?
Yep. Thank you, Suresh.
Thank you all. Bye.
You want to take over?
Bruce covered what I was going to talk about with the two scenarios, but I will just say that at the moment we haven't projected to change our borrowing plans for the year based on capital spend. If there are any significant unbudgeted projects coming through, an update to the borrowing resolution will just come via those reports, and I'll just be tracking that and keeping an eye on that. I was going to talk to the two scenarios there as well, mainly for Bruce's benefit, which I think that he's understood my graphs quite well. But that scenario B really just looks at the water's money coming in 2025, and we'll put that on deposit to match planned debt issuances and maturities. So that essentially brings down our forecast debt, and then that brings the minimum of the policy band down as well. So you'll see in the scenario B graph that we are right in the middle of the Treasury policy bands in that particular scenario. Suresh mentioned the forward start swaps when he was showing you the swap grid there, and that's how we're currently managing the 2027, where we're right on the line of the minimums at the moment. So we're just, every time we issue debt, we're looking at that and looking at whether we need to do a forward start swap of a small amount just to keep us above that until we have more certainty around the waters reform stuff. I'll take any more questions.
So that's clear as mud. So someone was, who was it that was going to, was it you, Stephen, that was going to ask about what the actual policy is, which I think Shireen's just touched on. Yeah.
Yeah, Sheree, you've largely answered my question, but I think, I guess my question or concern was that there wasn't an explicit link between the scenarios and the recommendations. So it wasn't entirely clear in the recommendations as to how that linked to scenario B. So yeah, you've largely covered in your verbal. So thank you for that. But I think going forward, it would be helpful to have that clear.
Yeah, so the recommendations are just to continue on the same business as usual, keeping an eye on what will happen with waters, but we have to manage our debt book as things stand right now according to Treasury policy. So that's why we're continuing to do the small forward start swaps at the moment to keep us within the current Treasury policy bands. So those are based on our LTPA debt forecasts.
And on the assumption that the water pay down will come through, that will then put you in scenario B. Yeah.
Yes,
and you'll manage it on a day-to-day basis depending on how that tracks.
Correct.
Yeah, understand. But yeah, I don't think that was clear in the report. That was
Okay.
Anything else? So we have some recommendations there, which is basically to receive the report, keep doing what they're doing at the moment. Yeah, business as usual. So someone prepared to move that. Thank you, Stephen. Someone second that? Bill, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, thank you very much. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. So that brings us to the second item, which is the Mount Maunganui Planning and Delivery Program. Sarah.
Thank you. The paper introduces the Mount Planning and Delivery Program, which we have established really to ensure that planning and delivery of projects across the Mount are connected and coordinated, particularly through our communications and engagement with the community. You'll see in the paper that there's over 30 projects underway through the Mount area, and we provide an overview of 8 significant projects within the paper. Just a point is that all of those projects will come to this committee and through to council for their own decisions. So this, the program and our reporting to you isn't intended to replace that process, but this is about you having the oversight of all of the pieces of work that are underway in the Mount. We did provide the paper to a number of groups prior to today, and we've received correspondence from the Mount Business Association who emphasised how many of those projects are of importance to the business community and want close engagement through all of those. So a key is that engagement in the spatial plan is starting now, and community engagement, formal community engagement, will be commencing through March and May next year. So I'll just take the report as read, and if there's any questions, but just emphasising this is about oversight of all of the work underway in the Mount.
I know that we've got quite a few interested members of the public here. We're not making any decisions today. This is really trying to bring it all together so that, because there is a lot happening, and we felt it was important that it be made very clear how all of these, there is all this work going on, and then that we are trying to get some oversight and some make sure that we're coordinated and that we don't overwhelm the community with going out on a variety of different things, so that we can try and manage it together. I'd just say from Bruce, and it was a point that I was interested in, where we're setting up this integrated working group to manage all of this. So his question is, does it have any delegated authority, and how do functional GMs relate to it, and what are its benefits and to whom?
Excellent questions, and the working group will be all the project leads across the organisation. So all of those projects that we've listed in there will be connected. And some of the key first steps of those is being able to map out when consultation, when engagement is going to occur, so we make sure there's no inconsistencies, whether we can have a conversation rather than 15 conversations on different projects. We will have a governance group with all of the GMs involved that the working group reports up to, and that's where some of those key decisions around should we press pause on some engagement, or are there different ways that we could work in order to make sure the community are on board and aware of all of the work that's underway. And that governance group will report through here to the committee.
The other thing that it occurred to me is that the Mount does have quite a strong ratepayers association. I didn't see them on the list, but I think that is one community link that should be added in. I don't know how many years they've been going, but I met with Michael, their chair, a couple of weeks ago, and have agreed to go and talk with them early in the new year, and it would be good if you could come with us. But on a regular basis, they should be being part of that. So when you're thinking about engagement, because they can get out into the wider community. I'm going to open it up for other questions, comments. Bill.
Thanks, Chair, and certainly support your comment in terms of the Mount ratepayers, and I also presume the Business Association will be on that regular list, because I think it's key, because we have lots of other organisations, but it's in terms of those community organisations actually being engaged with over the range of projects. I had. Yeah, it was a question around, and it might be for another forum, but the connection between the work on the Mount Spatial Plan, and then there is the industrial planning study underway, which is being completed, I think, about the middle of next year, mid-23. So I was just interested in terms of then what happens next when that study is completed, given that we're also having the development and close to completion of the spatial plan.
Good morning. Bill, are you referring to the Smart Growth Industrial Land Study? Yeah, yes. So Well,
Probably relates to Jim.
yeah, I think there's two things. There's the Mount Industrial study, which is going to hopefully set a long-term aspiration for that Mount Industrial area. Alongside that, there's the Smart Growth Industrial Land Study, which is going to identify options for industrial expansion into the longer term across the Western Bay sub-region. And that will feed into the future development strategy, and there might be some crossover between those two studies. For example, it might identify that, there's the potential for some of the expansion that might be planned in the Mount area, or some of those types of businesses in there could locate in other areas within the sub-region moving forward. So I see the two sort of coming together at that point.
In terms of the current Mount Industrial area and what comes out of that particular work, I was just interested how that may or may not feed into the Mount Spatial Plan. Given these are two areas that abut one another.
Yeah, and I guess that's why we're doing both at the same time, so that the crossover of guess that residential area and that industrial area can be considered at the same time. Sarah, do you want to add further to that?
Yeah, that's exactly the intent of having them run at the same time. As you'll see, the map in the paper has the two areas adjacent to each other and will have impacts on each other. So having your options that will come out of the industrial planning work will be critical for the spatial plan.
Yes.
Follow up on that. So from the public's point of view, because they're two different studies, but we know in the minds of many of the Mount residents, the two are connected. How do they put those two together? I mean, I can understand we've got them, but how, from the public's point of view, how do they put them together?
So the idea is the spatial plan will also give an overview of all of the other work streams. So you've got the industrial, you've also got Hewlett's, you've got some of the stuff sort of happening in the emergency type space, etc. So it will give an overview of all of those and explain how they're all working, and then provide that linkage and show that we're looking to integrate them all. But the spatial plan won't be all things to all people, because these things have to sit in their own technical work streams, but it will look to tell the story to the community and help the community know where to go to find information and participate in each of those respective processes. Makes sense?
I think it's going to be quite critical that it works from, I mean, I know it's critical from a technical point of view to work at our end, but I think it's going to be quite critical that at the public's end, it is simple for them to be able to have that feedback go into the overall.
Thank you. My next comment relates to the Mount Industrial area. And if there are any changes in that area, there's a very clear process to go through in terms of any zoning, etc. We've also got clearly there's the airshed over the top, and there are also the range of concerns in terms of therefore air quality. Has there been any thinking, because there's no reference, as I could see in the report, about having undertaken a cumulative health assessment of that industrial area? Because if there are going to be changes to the zoning provisions and what's permitted, not permitted, or what has some restrictions put on it, I would have thought there would have needed to be that type of health assessment that would then go through the scrutiny of the hearings process and then ultimately judicial processes through Environment Court, etc., etc.
Thank you. And our understanding is that the officer, the medical officer of health, is undertaking that study at the moment. You'll know that we are members of the Mount Air Quality Working Party that is convened by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and they are expecting to report back to that working party at their first hui next year, which will be in February. So we can bring that report back when we report up to the program again.
A supplementary chair, happy with that. And I think as part of that process is the review or assessment of that work, because that would need to stand scrutiny through those judicial processes. So it would need to be undertaken to a level to enable that to occur. So that's the main point I wanted to make, Sarah.
Rohario.
Ai morena tātou, ko te mea tuatahi me mihi kātika ki a koe e shared me tō karakia I whakawātea ai I tō tātou nei hui. O tira kia tātou katoa kua tai mai ki te hui I te ata nei. Tēnā tātou. Kia ora, Sarah. Thank you for your report. I just have one question relating to paragraph 60, and that's in terms of the labelling of mana whenua here. Now, I just note that mana whenua is not one natural or legal grouping in itself when looking at all the rest listed here. So my question is, which mana whenua groups are involved here, and perhaps a comment for the future to list them out there, because each of those different groups have their rangatira and have their own mana. And really the question is around just so we're not leaving somebody out who may need to be included there.
Kia ora. For our next report, we will pull out all of the information on how we are working with tangata whenua and who have been involved and who we are engaging with for all of those pieces of work, so that there's no confusion. Completely take the point. Yeah.
Kia ora, Sarah, thank you for your report. I do think this is really useful because from our point of view, but also from the public's point of view, trying to get an understanding around, the myriad of projects that we currently have on the go, but also the things that we're planning for in terms of the future. So ideally, we would have done the spatial plan first, to get a long-term, clear view, community participation and engagement around how they see their community in the future and how it grows, how businesses function and operate, and the impacts on them from the out industrial area and the like. So, we can't do that because we've got a whole lot of other things that we're working in train, and also bearing in mind the requirements from central government around the medium residential density requirements for us to respond to that and to be able to step through that process. I suppose my question is, and you've outlined it in the report about the engagement. So all of these various projects, whether they're placemaking, housing, transport, Mount Industrial, we're engaging with the community, with stakeholders across all those various projects. But then at a high level, ideally trying to put all those pieces together so the community understands how everything kind of fits together. And I understand that's what we're trying to do here, is to provide that clarity to the community that we do have a joined up plan and we do have a forward program in terms of what we're trying to achieve for the Mount community. And I suppose the question is in terms of getting people involved, we've got industry involved, we've got some of the sector groups involved, but how do we communicate that more broadly to the wider community?
It's a real challenge that, seeing 30 projects all together on in a report shows how complex it is, and it's a challenge that's our responsibility to make it as easy as possible for the community to engage in. So we are working through those options right now. As I said, one of the first steps of the working group is to pull together the intended engagement plans. Where are the points that we had intended to go out and talk, and how do we do that differently? How do we work with the community differently, and how do we have single conversations that it's not 30 individual projects? So I don't have an answer right now, but it's definitely something that's top of mind for the team.
It's the critical point, and the fact that we have members of the public who've come along specifically for this item shows that there's going to be enormous interest in this pulling this together, and it's important that we get that community. I don't want to say consultation, because it will be engagement is what we're talking about. How do we get that community engaged in talking with us about what they want for the future of the Mount area? And then our job is to translate that into the technical stuff that we need to do if we need to want to make any changes. But that first step is how do we engage with the community on a level that that they can feel comfortable getting involved with. So we look forward to your answers, and there might be some people here that have some good input into how they might see that happening. Shad.
Thanks, Anne. Sorry, just a supplementary question as well, because I think there's a number of other participants, I think, in terms of the work that we're trying to do. We've got Waka Kotahi, who look after the State Highway Network. We've got the port. We've got education. We've got health, and a whole lot of other sectors who are rightly responsible for particular parts of the community. And so having those joined up conversations, I think, is really important, really critical, whether that's with industry groups, whether that's with Waka Kotahi, whether that's with government agencies on some of the other inputs, kāinga ora. While we have a overarching kind of planning role, it's our role to kind of bring all of those various sectors together in a partnership way that we all, ideally moving in the same direction to be able to deliver the things that our community expect.
Morena, Sarah, thank you for your report. Look, it's just really on the back, and I had made this comment before the meeting happened. I'm glad you made reference to the 30 council-led projects in the area. In this day and age with sort of health and well-being concerns, and we often see it in the mana whenua space, where a big project, be it a big roading project like TNL, or comes into the community, it's quite taxing on that community. And when I read the report, it's one, and you've heard lots of comments with regard to the, connected and everything dovetailing and make sure everyone's communicating. But I'm not sure if you have got a mechanism to monitor and keep an eye on the health and well-being of the community itself, because it is incredibly taxing. These projects will take, over a number of years. Don't get me wrong; I think it's a positive thing. The community and the amount have been looking for this sort of input for a while, but to have it all come in one sort of big heap, it can be quite trying. And as I say, I've often seen this in the mana whenua space, where our people don't necessarily say anything, but over a measured number of years, you can see it's taking quite a toll. So I don't know if you've got something built into your, in your systems of policy procedures where you actively try to monitor the community and see that they are in good shape. And secondly, can I just make the comment? I think maybe Rahoria sort of said, talked about mana whenua, and I agree in terms of trying to list it. But there is a distinction between tangata whenua and mana whenua. And we're looking, and we can assist you and management in terms of when these reports are put together, who we believe the mana whenua group, mana whenua, should be there to make sure that they're being consulted and no one's being left out. So there is a distinction, tangata whenua, mana whenua, but then also dovetailing back health and well-being of everybody in the community. And I am concerned, 8 significant projects, 30 around the place. So I don't know if you do have a mechanism to overarching to keep a monitor, but if you haven't, maybe give it some thought, please.
Okay, someone then prepared, the recommendations are, do we just receive the report and note this coordination? I think just sensing from the comments or the questions around the table and the concerns that we would want regular updates on this. Probably because this committee meets every 6 weeks, so it might pay just to have a short item just each time we have a meeting, just giving us an update on where you are and what's happening. I don't think we need it in the recommendation, but just make a note. But is someone you happy to move, Bill, and a seconder, Shad? Any further discussion? Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. And thank you to the members of the public that have come along interested in it. I hope you all email in with some of your suggestions about how you can get involved. Okay, so that brings us to the integrity framework policies. Thanks, Andy. Big piece of work. Chris and Sharon, thank you.
Morena tātou. So just to introduce this paper, earlier in the year, the Auditor General released an integrity framework. And so we have formulated a TCC integrity framework, which includes policies and procedures that were already in place, and some of them have required review. So today we're asking the committee to approve 3 policies: the fraud, risk and protected disclosures. And we're also asking the committee to make a recommendation to council to amend the terms of reference for the committee so that the exec can approve the framework and the strategy. So we're happy to take.
Thank you very much. It was a big piece of work and it's a really good report. Thank you. And if I put another hat on as chair of Transparency International, they were absolutely impressed by the work that had been done when I talked about what our council had done. I have a number of questions from Bruce, and I think if I put them to you first, and then we'll open it up for anyone else. So his first question is he's interested in how the culture will be developed. So whilst the policies should be approved, he's in favour of that. That actual getting that culture through the organisation is quite critical. So have you got some comments on that, Alistair?
Morena. The idea of cultural development is a slow burn, but there is an element of science to it. We start with our policies, that they're as clear and as clean and the processes are transparent. And that's what we're discussing here today. The one that's not here is our code of conduct, which will be coming to the council early next year. And that's about our behaviours. After that, it's then more of an art, which is the communication and the development. So the objective is to encourage accountability and ownership through our colleagues. So we start with things like management briefings, which we do on a very regular basis, where we share the best practices and we talk about the behaviours to staff on a widespread scale. Then we're into training and webinars, where we get content and we make sure we ask all staff and contractors to read it as well. We include it in our supplier agreements. We also extend into the recruitment phase, where we target questions to all new beginners. We ask them questions about their values. We ensure that it's included. And then through our employee engagement program, where we pulse staff on a quarterly basis, we look at how people are actually feeling about the organisation and have we shown up. Finally, performance measurement is a big part of the council's objectives over the next year, where we measure more of what we do. Because integrity, if we say what we do, if we don't measure it, we may struggle to show that we did anything. And so a lot of the investment at a leadership level for our top 40 or 50 staff will be about supporting them to put measurement programs in place that if we told a ratepayer we would do something, we say that we did it, we measure how long it took and the quality of what we did.
Thanks, Alistair. That's very clear. I think part of what Bruce was concerned about is particularly the protected disclosure policy, and what do we do to in that culture change to encourage people to speak up and give them confidence that that it's not going to be damaging to their careers, because that's always the biggest worry, isn't it?
It is. The challenge is really retaliation, that if I say something, I'm concerned that there'll be repercussions. This turns up in two ways. The first is the more subtle form of retaliation, where maybe I don't get picked for a project, or I feel that something may not have turned up. And then there's the obvious, the last 5 events haven't gone my way, or I could have been dismissed. We have to put safeguards in place for those individuals. And typically, other than the ones that are in the policy whereby anonymity is protected, the extension to that is that we check in with the individuals after the whistleblowing on a confidential level to find out, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Have any job evaluations or performance evaluations gone against you? And then track that data. Now, at this point, we haven't had any whistleblowers, to our knowledge, in the last 12 months. But as we develop education and awareness, it may be that we see an increase in those. And that's when those controls and compliance checks have to kick in.
One question he had particularly was in that, exactly along those lines. I'm not going to try and find it, but I think he was making the point that sometimes someone wants to bring something to the attention, and in the policy that's being proposed, it's through a line manager, but later on, the mayor and the chief executive are able to receive those. And he's just saying, shouldn't the two be aligned? That anyone should be able to feel, because sometimes they don't want to go to their immediate manager. Sometimes they might think that if they go to the top, that they'll be safer. And he's asking, shouldn't we be allowing for that?
So the wording of the policy allows for a disclosure to approach the mayor or the chief executive at any time. It's just that we've worded it in such a way as to encourage going to one of the other council offices in the first instance if it's appropriate.
Yeah, I only got these this morning, which is why I haven't had time to go through. But have you had access to Bruce's comments?
Yes, we've been discussing them perhaps for the last 45 minutes.
Right, okay.
A lot of the other feedback that Bruce has provided, I'm anticipating Chris and Sharon are about to say yes to the majority of the,
right,
not semantic, but those adjustments. These bigger questions about how embedded we are successful at that, and then also how confident, if I want to whistleblow, if I'm going to go to a manager I know versus a position and a chair, we actually don't know the answer to that. We're doing what we think is right, that a general manager should be approachable and held in a position. We also are keen to ensure, as the organisation expands, that the chief executive and the mayor, they're doing their work appropriately. Is that the whistleblower? It's an art. We're open to making the change, though, if you'd like to.
Okay. Well, look, I'm happy if you've received Bruce's and you're comfortable with that, because I don't want to take. I mean, he spent a lot of time on this framework, which is very helpful, but it's quite time consuming. So maybe if I take it that you've got them and you're happy to talk with him about some of the changes that he's suggesting, and we move on, because I know I'm sure that other members around the table have got questions? Happy with that?
Yep, happy with that.
Thank you. Wayne?
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd take the opportunity to lead off just because it dovetails into what we just spoke about. But we talked about culture, and Alistair, your explanation of what you're going to try and move forward and achieve. But at a really high level of setting that culture, and I could be wrong, it's just what's read in the report, because the Fraud and Prevention and Management Policy, it appears that it was adopted in 2007, and then there was editing amendments made in 2015. And then it's got here, Audit New Zealand picked up that it probably time to have it reviewed. Well, I think that's sort of quite obvious. I think that's an extraordinary amount of time, I think, for such an important policy. And again, this is not a witch hunt, not to look back. So for whatever reasons, but I did again pose a question. A lot of organisations have got a rotating system that your policies are on review. You know, you take X number, you make sure they're put here and it rotates, and you take it upon yourself. So at the highest level of setting your culture and approach, which then drops down into policy and procedure. But I'm not trying to pose this in the form of a question. Have you taken up that challenge to set your own standards as to how you rotate all of your policies and make sure they're reviewed in a prudent manner?
So as part of the setting up our internal integrity framework, we have looked at all the policies that are under that, and we have a schedule of review. So, and we're happy to provide that afterwards if you want to see it. But that basically the idea is that, yeah, we would make sure that these policies are reviewed on a regular basis as we need to.
I think the question of reviewing our values interests me, and perhaps when the new induction occurs with the new councillors, that might be a good chance to step back and say, what are our values? But the procedures and the policies, there's a calendar, and some will go straight to executive, some will come here. But as Sharon said, we're happy to share the calendar. I think the calendar's a bit shorter than once every 4 years. We might turn around a bit faster though, especially going forward.
Especially in something like fraud, which changes. People learn. Okay. Anything else? Oh, Shad.
Thank you for the report. And I understand the requirements to align with the OAG integrity framework and the feedback that we got from Audit New Zealand. I suppose one of the questions in the back of my mind is thinking about the size and scale of a problem, or whether we have a problem, or we're going to anticipate a problem. And I don't get a sense of have we had a problem? Do we have a problem? And do we anticipate a problem? I suppose thinking through those types of scenarios. Yeah.
A lot of us as employees of Tauranga City Council are still new, and we can only work on what we've seen. The data tells us that there isn't a problem. Are we going on the hunt for problems? I think is the question. That over time, if we encourage whistleblowing, are we going to end up in a place where people are looking for white elephants and unicorns? I think the intent of the legislation was to do a little bit of that, to give people permission to speak up. Are we a conservative culture? Are we a little bit more introverted, and do we need to think about that against the backdrop of this legislation? I think the intent is yes, we need to speak up more. We need to ask for those challenges. So the answer, in my opinion, is that no, we don't have a problem. We've got a lot of folks who are new, we're ambitious and hopeful, but over time, when we see those issues, we want to find those problems.
Yeah, and I've just got one other question. So in terms of reporting, so thinking about, yes, these procedures that we, encourage people to step through, but then ultimately when an incident comes up, who are we reporting to the Office of Auditor General, or who ultimately monitors the overarching framework? I assume it's the office, but I'd be interested in your feedback on that.
From recollection, we do have various obligations to report where we have confirmed instances of fraud, whether that be to the police or to the OAG, etc.
Really, the Office of the Auditor General will be keeping, our auditors will be keeping a close eye on particularly some of the policies, because we've had comments from them in the past. But I guess ultimately the final accountability lies with the council to ensure that we have the structure in place, that we have policies in place, and then the protection for the staff. Bill.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just interested in terms of how this framework connects in with our, the rest of the TCC family, being the CCOs, or do they all have their own individual frameworks covering all of these matters?
I think some of my more experienced colleagues might know more about the CCO rules and the level of independence that they have from the council. We have a project right now with the CCOs to share more information and provide better services. That has extended to policy sharing as well, to give the CCO the choice whether the statutory policies should just automatically apply to the CCO. I'm not sure what the legislation says, and it might not even be that prescriptive.
Yeah, so what we do with all our policies is they are offered to CCOs, but they are independent, and it's their decision if they actually adopt those policies. So if they're statutorily required to, they can adopt their own, but they can start with ours. Of course, we always have the opportunity through a statement of intent or something like that to be more prescriptive if we needed to be.
Kia ora koutou. I just have one small question that's regarding page 63 under the definition of a disclosure. I note that E includes the mayor and elected members. I was just wondering if committee members were included in there or whether they're excluded.
Yeah, I'd say they're included as well in that. We can amend that to add that in, yeah.
Be helpful to have it explicit so that committee members knew exactly, because I think you've asked a couple of times, or we've had this conversation a couple of times with a couple of things, yeah. Stephen and then Wayne.
Thank you. I think it's great that we have been proactive in the response to the OAG report. Often these reports from central agencies get written and you wonder what on earth ever happens. So it's great to see the responsiveness, so well done team. I concur with my fellow colleagues' comments around the need for a regular review and reporting of incidences of fraud disclosures coming back up to the council as part of the regular routine, and then we will see transparently as a council what, you know, where we sit on this spectrum of issues. I did have a query on paragraph 33, which is on page 57, where the executive has requested that responsibility for approving the risk framework be moved from the committee to the chief executive, but it doesn't explain why that recommendation was made. And obviously the terms of reference are recommended to be changed, but why was my question.
So the risk framework is really the procedural element of how we do risk with the policy, the why. It's a new document, and it's a document which, as we learn to work with it, will undoubtedly have some changes in the coming months and years. So from a procedural basis, it is something that we felt was better to sit within the realms of the executive to have the ability to make those small changes as it's developed.
And that's fine. I mean, I guess our perspective is that it is working. And so it comes back to that reporting regime where changes have been made, they've had the positive or negative impact.
Just looking at the policy, which I presume is on page 85. So the council evaluates the risk, the committee responsible for the risk reviews and approves the policy reviews report. Am I looking at the right place? Yeah. Review reports from management and auditors. So there is still governance oversight of that, and then executive are responsible for approving it and making the changes. So it is actually working its way out. Yeah. Not all on your shoulders. Wayne. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So, is someone then prepared to move the recommendation? So, we'd be receiving the report, adopting those 3 changed policies, and recommending to council that. And then the change to the terms of reference for the Strategy, Finance and Risk Committee. Someone, you prepared to move that, Wayne? Thank you. And Bill seconded. Any further discussion on that? No. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Really good report. Got lots of pieces of paper here. Okay. 9.4, open space level of service.
Good morning, everybody. I will let the team do an introduction, but just would like to note that this is one of 3 reports on the agenda that's a joint effort between the strategy and growth and the community services team, which is always good to see. And I know that the ladies here have done a lot of work on actually getting this report to you through I think this is the third time it's been in front of you, and a lot of consultations been undertaken, but it's also a step in the full review. But I'll hand over to, I think Sharon is going to lead.
So for this policy, we just wanted to bring attention to the fact that it's a minor and specific amendment to the policy. So this is to enable flexibility for the structure planning that's happening at Tauranga West. So we're asking to amend a very small specific part of the policy around new greenfield developments to retain their 1.7 hectares per 1,000 population, but remove the requirement for 50% to be neighbourhood reserves, and just some tweaking around the wording that if it's impractical to demonstrate that good urban design outcomes can be achieved, that would be the reason the 50% is removed. And also, as noted in the report, there were lots of other issues raised through consultation around other parts of the policy and in response to our question around how we can achieve good open space outcomes. So we've addressed those issues in the report, but there are no recommendations to change the policy at this stage. And with the council strategic framework review and city plan change 33, we have a schedule to review the whole policy next year, and so those other issues can be raised at that point.
Very much. You put a lot of work into this. We appreciate that, and as Barbara said, we've had a lot of input from the community. Any questions, comments, Bill?
Thanks, Chair. Got a suggestion for a tweak into the recommendation, but I'll come to that in a moment. In paragraph 22, there's a discussion around the issues raised, and I certainly strongly support the last sentence in that paragraph about the overall approach to providing quality reserves by focusing on the start of the planning process with developers to develop a quality green space environmental considerations as a priority. What I take from that is that the structure planning process is absolutely critical fine. There'll be detail that will change, but the framework and the direction from the structure planning process would be critical in setting the scene for the implementation of this and related policies. Okay. So that assessment of the structure plan. So I understand for some parts of the city that the structure planning is undertaken by the private sector or the developers, or is it totally within the purvey of the city council?
My understanding is that would depend on whether it is a private plan change, in which case it would be the private, led by the private sector, or a plan change, for example, Tauranga West, which is driven by council.
Okay, no, thanks for that, because what that is leading to is ensuring the assessment of that structure planning undertaken as part of the private plan change. There is that critical analysis and review undertaken in terms of the provision of open space and reserves. So I just wanted to put that on the table. And the other suggestion, Chair, recommendation B, at the end of that, which I'm happy with all of that, but with the addition, with guidance from the urban design panel, because I think it's just helping to close that loop and using that broad expertise and knowledge of the panel, but it's actually ensuring there's another pair of eyes, another bit of input in terms of that policy implementation.
Just add quickly to that, I've raised that very point with the people that are assisting with running that panel. So I've raised Tauranga West, for example, as a project would be great to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, are you adding that into B as a 3, or are you adding it on to B1?
I was just adding it to B1, Chair.
B1,
it's after the word achieved, with guidance from the urban design panel.
Okay, yep, and you're moving that.
All of that.
You. Shad, are you seconding?
I am seconding it.
Thank you.
But I do have a question, and it kind of relates to Bill's question. And I can't recall, but do we have sufficient landscape capacity on the panel to be able to provide that assistance? I don't know if you guys can answer it. Somebody else might be able, but I know it's a mixed panel of both, architect, landscape, and cultural, and a whole lot of other areas. But from a landscape point of view,
I'm afraid I don't know. I have glanced at the makeup of the panel, and as you say, there are definitely landscape designers on there, landscape architects on there. We've obviously our own team of urban and landscape designers who would also be able to provide assistance with, assessing these proposals. But I don't know the makeup, sorry, in terms of the exact.
Perhaps we can sort of pass it on, because from memory there was only one specialist landscape architect on it, although others had qualifications in landscape. But it's really getting that critical eye of a policy like this, where there is discretion able to be used. It's trying to get that expert. Yep.
Feedback from the team is that they feel they do, but I think that we can, as we receive this feedback, keep a really close eye on that to make sure that we don't need to add somebody else to the panel.
Check. So, I think are you trying to cover the circumstance, Bill, where the minimum 15% isn't addressed because of practicality, and that's when the urban design panel kicks in, or are you wanting it on all assessments? I think you were only referring to which would be B2, not B1. I'm just trying to check what it was that you were looking at. I think you're trying to say where you are using that exemption, that at that point, so I think then it relates to B2. It's only when the exemption applies. Yeah.
Off to the urban design panel. Yep. All right, so with that alteration, you're happy with that, Chair, B2? Anything further? Oh, put that then. So we're receiving the report, making that small change, but you have noted the points that have been raised through the consultation. And I'll put that, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. It's been a long time working its way through the system. Thank you. 9.5, use of council land policy deliberations report. One change of face. Vicky, Barbara, did you want to lead off?
I just think that my comments before are relevant. Again, we've got a team of ladies that have been working on this for a little while from the joint teams. So I'll hand over to Vicky to introduce.
Thank you, Barbara. Kia ora koutou. It was around this time last year where we first talked to you about 13 issues and options. And then in February again this year, we added a few for mobile shops in as well. We did some consultation with key stakeholders in between then and when we came back to you with the draft policy in August. And the kind of core changes for that policy was to take our 10 existing policies and lift them up into a single overarching policy that set out some key policy principles to take into decisions around the use of council land. And so we really wanted to make sure that those principles resonated with the community. We went out and we consultated on those principles, and the results of that are in the attachment, the consultation survey results, with a resounding 42 agreeing and just 11 disagreeing. We also proposed a number of changes around commercial operators on council land in response to kind of the pre-engagement feedback and also stakeholder feedback around the need for commercial operators to show a public benefit and to be high quality and of good value to the community. We were proposing a Qualmark certification as part of those requirements. From consultation with commercial operators, we heard that given the costs were coming back in the next few years, which previously averaged around $1,000 for that certification, and given that it generally involved a 3-hour audit review from someone not based in Tauranga necessarily, that the value wasn't necessarily there in terms of that review compared to perhaps for some of our surfing schools which operate on Mount Beachside. The Surfing New Zealand registration comes with a lot more assurance, and it is a cheaper $300 a year and does have a regular person who goes out and checks that they're maintaining that quality. So we're suggesting a change from the Qualmark to a Surfing New Zealand registration for our surf schools. We did hear from the community they were keen for some of these provisions to come in a little bit sooner. So we will be rolling them out ideally on a as renewals are needed basis and new applications come in. Some of the community would prefer if that was a straight away change to the new requirements. That would take additional resource to review our roughly 80 to 90 existing licenses. And so we're recommending sticking with that transitional approach whereby we update the license as things come through. From consultation, we heard some other issues around the condition of sites after users have used them. So we're proposing a small adjustment to the principles just to reflect that we expect people who use council land to leave it in good condition for the next users. And that then gives us an avenue if people are continually disrespecting the sites to take that into account when we're making those decisions around using council land. We heard a lot around the leases when we went out to consult. So there was some community concerns around that termination clause length particularly. We met with Bay Trust and also with TECT to check their level of appetite for a termination clause, and they were broadly comfortable. I think when we had the hearings, we heard from the Kindergarten Association in particular around those, the need to raise fundraising if they are going to need to move site. So we're suggesting a change to that termination clause to acknowledge that, to allow discretion for the chief executive to set a termination clause from 2 to 7 years where certain criteria are met, particularly around that kind of ability to relocate. And in general, just that 1 year termination clause we're proposing goes to a 2-year as standard, just to give people more notice as well. In that Lisa's consultation, we also heard some feedback around that clarification of the categorisation of play centres. So the existing policy was a little unclear about play centres, because in the definitions it said that they're not an ECE facility, but then in the actual body of the policy it mentioned a number of provisions around the Mount Maunganui play centre relocation. So it's a little confusing for people. So we were just clearing that up to say that play centre as a parent-led ECE is more akin to a community group, and so therefore was not included in the definition of an ECE. However, that did bring up some kind of concerns around the equity of between play centre and other forms of ECE in hearings. And the final change is just around high performance sport. So we heard from the community that they were happy to have high performance sport, but they wanted to make sure that community sport wasn't compromised in terms of accommodating high performance sport. We went back to our colleagues and we worked through how that might look, and we feel that rather than having the criteria sit in the policy, which very much is a across the city policy, it would be better to take more of a site-specific approach through either the master plans, which are now developed for Blake Park and for Tauranga Wharapai Domain, or also the reserve management plans for particular sites. That way we don't end up with high-performance sports spilling over into more community-based spaces.
It's a very thorough explanation of, but quite a complicated process. We did check with the Associate Minister of Education recently on our definition around play centres, which as a former minister, we're of a might. I think your recommendations are very sensible. If I look at Bruce's comments, the only well, he's got two things. The only clarification he'd seek is the final policy is the clear ability to use discretion to require bonds. So I take from that he doesn't see that. I'm
happy
clear
to
enough.
add that in, yes.
Yeah.
In practice, we do it now, but I
Yeah.
agree it would be good to have highlighted in the policy.
Yep. And the second point he made was references to para 6.8 is incorrect. See para 6.6 and 6.11. It should be to para 6.9. And I just haven't had time to check what that's all about, but I give you that free of charge.
Update that in the final policy.
And if I could just
absolutely.
note that it linked to back to fees and charges for the quantum of bonds.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Any other questions? Yeah, Shad.
Thank you for the report and the explanation. Yeah, and I do recall when we did have this conversation about a number of, probably 10 or 12 policies coming to us and bringing them all together. So, it's a great piece of work, I think, trying to consolidate and bring everything together into one. I do have, and I support the direction in the ECE matter. Being a play centre father some 20 odd years ago, probably longer. And the way we've managed that. I do have a question though, and that's in relation to the memorial seats. It was raised as an issue on Mo'o when we removed one without notifying families. And so there's I understand, I couldn't quite find it, but I know it's in here, a 10-year period that memorial seats can be in place, or if council needs to remove them for any other reason, or if the seats deteriorated for all. And so thinking about memorial seats and when we need to remove them and trying to find the families, which I know that we've had an issue on mobile trying to find the family that asked for the memorial seat. Thinking about, do we need a process to either review all of our memorial seats, or when somebody asks for a memorial seat, make sure we've got clear records of who. And then I did pick up the point in the report that we don't put plaques on trees. And then, so if we remove a memorial seat, then what do we do?
Yes, ideally we'll be encouraging people to plant a tree first as opposed to memorial seats. We'll be moving to a more limited, I guess, selection of memorial seats available across the network, as opposed to perhaps in the past where we may have a memorial seat for a request for a particular place and then we'd assess. We'd be looking at where do we have options for memorial seats across the network, and how do we manage a kind of, process for people to request that seat. As part of that, again, it's making sure that we've got contact details and follow-up details, because it can be a long time between when they agree to the seat and when we're actually looking to decommission the seat, if it needs to be reviewed after the 10-year kind of maximum. So yes, definitely the process for that needs to be ironclad so that we don't end up upsetting people who are grieving. Yeah.
But often those are ways that family or friends see that person's contribution. No, it's not that person's contribute to the city. And often a seat is put in a place that needs a seat, and this person, would like to have a way of contributing to the well-being of the community. So I guess if we're going to discourage memorial seats, and a lot of councils are doing it because for the reasons that you've outlined, but I do think we need to, and I've said this before, we need to think of ways that individual community members can contribute in some way to the ongoing development of their city. And, when you're fundraising for various things, finding ways just for the average person to contribute. And, I think of some of the examples over the years that they're just small amounts of money that an average person is happy to donate to. But I think, beholds us to think, to make sure those opportunities are there, because those memorial type seats do create problems when at the end of the 10 years and it's removed. And there may well be other ways, and accept that planting a tree is a really good way, and we've adopted that with our citizenship ceremonies to get people to, put their roots down literally. But sometimes it's a definite contribution to the upgrading of amenities and the upgrading of the community. And so some way just to acknowledge that or encompass that would be helpful.
Adding part of that provision to speak to like other items as agreed on a case-by-case basis, and then that would leave the door open, especially as like the city centre's upgrading and there may be different opportunities in terms of memorials. So yeah, we could create an addition to that to allow a discretion for other items.
I think that would be helpful, because you never know. I mean, I know there are a lot of institutions that go around looking for, asking people to leave something in their wills. And I'm not suggesting that, but sometimes people and families do want to contribute to the community in a small way, and we should be looking to make every opportunity for them.
Perhaps, if through your chair, if we had something general in the policy, and as we do projects and people have become available, we can use an opportunity through a project to upgrade something, a facility.
And just to clarify, that's fine to be delegated to staff, relevant staff.
Thank you, Chair. My question, it isn't a form, is with regards to the high performance sport part of the report, and the question but I'll give it some context as to who has this discretion if we go along with the recommendation, with the options, because I gather Sport Bay have plenty made some suggestion that the community wants to make use of some of this land, you know, as that's quite often taken up by high performance entities. So reading through this, I like it. I think it's great. My overarching concern, though, is as to who has that discretion, because a practical example, again, growing up in Tauranga, 4 boys in my family, and every Christmas, and this will be without doubt, we'll all get together and the challenge will be laid down to go and play touch rugby with all the nieces and nephews. Once upon a time, it was just us. Now it's extended to huge family involvement. And, you know, and you run down, we used to run down to Blake Park, everyone participate, you know, end up being, you know, dozens and dozens of whānau running around spending the day there. I see what you're trying to achieve here. My concern is that, you know, high performance sport is incredibly organised, you know, and they wedge out these things sometimes years in advance, if not several months in advance. They know they need that area. The days of rocking up to our local parks on a whim, saying we really want to utilise this space and something's been lodged 2 years in advance, I just think the hit rate, it'll be read, depending on what we vote on now. Be interesting to see over time what the hit rate is and whether the community wins some of those spaces given time on short notice. So it's just a real practical sort of concern, and I know you're about to tell me who it's delegated to, so thank you.
Well, I think that was Sport Bay of Plenty's concern as well, is that we are seeing Tauranga as a home for high performance sport, and so that demand is just increasing. And so with the existing policy, we were giving the ability for high performance sport to have priority where they could show a community benefit or where they were a Tauranga or a national based team. But I guess Sport Bay of Plenty's concern was that actually we'd see a lot of that going forward and it could spill over into your community reserve. And so speaking with Spaces and Places around kind of having that recognition of the right thing in the right space is important, and reserve management plans are our mechanism to do that. So if your reserve management plan for your local reserve says that this is left free for passive recreation and ad hoc community games, then a high performance sport group coming in to book it out, that's not really consistent. For Blake Park, we've obviously identified that that is a home for high performance sport. That's much more appropriate now. So it's using those reserve management plans, and Claire might be able to elaborate on it, but to set that direction around what's an appropriate space for this, what's an appropriate space for that kind of.
Quickly add as well, I guess, that doesn't then preclude the potential to change a reserve management plan to perhaps, you know, enable some kind of high performance sport on a site. So it doesn't sort of, it's not as though we're locking and loading it in with this policy, but that would then be a community conversation if we actually wanted to change the reserve management plan. So it gives more opportunity to actually consider what is appropriate, talking to the wider community as well, to the reserve management plan.
It puts a responsibility on council to be monitoring that and making sure that there is enough of that community space. And that's what we're grappling with at the moment, that hasn't happened. And so high performance sport has taken over. And part of the Blake Park discussions were about exactly that. How do you balance it? And then where are the other opportunities for the remainder of the community? And we've just dealt with the previous item, where we ended up with, I think the Lakes people came and said to us, 14 little parks where you can't get out and kick a ball around. So all of that goes together, but part of the long-term planning is always to make sure that we have sufficient community active and passive recreation spaces, and it's going to become more and more important as we intensify our residential areas. Is that what you were going to say? No?
Yep, absolutely. And that is the work that we're doing through the active reserve planning and the passive reserve planning to try and get that balance right. So we're actively working on that at the moment.
And that is an issue we're going to take into the open space review as well, when it kicks off the full review.
Bill.
Yeah, I was just going to, in terms, and I'm happy to move because
thank you. That
my
would be good.
proposal relates to the
Would be helpful.
recommendations.
Yep.
And that's B6, where it talks about confirming play centres are not considered, etc. Whether we actually added on some reasoning for that. And I've got, as they were parent-led and similar to other community playgroup activities, given there will be quite a bit of focus on that decision.
Yep, makes sense. That was one of the criticisms that was levelled at us, that we hadn't explained why. Is someone prepared to second those recommendations? Yeah, Wayne, thank you. Okay, any more questions, discussions? Really good work, really good work. I know we put you through the ringer on it. Mind you, you put us through the ringer this time last year. I remember it was a very long meeting, but I think it's a really good piece of work that I know the staff have put a lot of effort into, but that a lot of people have had their say and feel like they've had their say as we've developed it.
And yeah, I was just going to make that comment, Chair, in terms of the value of that opportunity for people to be well connected into the process and them seeing the outcome from that. So well done.
And I'd just like to add that we've put in quite a bit of thought now into the implementation and the handover. So we've started on that.
Hey, yes, so our work is finished and yours continues. All right, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I know Andy's sitting at the back eagerly awaiting, but I think we've been sitting for 2 hours. I think we might just have it's 11:16. How about we have 10 minutes? Do we need 10 minutes or 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Come back at 11:21. 11:21. Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Gavel. Ding ding. We've got a lot to get through today and we've gone a little bit slower than we should have, but important discussions. So Andy's coming to the table for item number 9.6, Growth and Land Use Projects Process Report, the quarterly report. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. I'll try and move quickly. Just brief comments to introduce the paper. And I won't pick up on everything that's in the cover report and certainly not everything that's in the attachment. There's quite a lot in there. But I'll start with the Paituriwhi Para Farm site. So there is an MOU that is now in place with Ngāti Kahu in terms of further looking at aspirations of both TCC and the hapu around that site. We've had an initial meeting and a second meeting is planned pre-Christmas. First meeting set out very well the aspirations of both parties and what they're seeking to achieve on the site. We'll seek to take that a bit further at the second meeting. I think it's important, given that it's been some time since we consulted on this project with the community. That was actually late last year, around about 12 months ago. And it was considered through the committee in February this year that we just continue to provide information and updates on that project. So just signalling that the aspirations to utilise some of the site for housing is still TCC's preferred approach, but with a more mixed approach around green space, sports fields, ecological outcomes, and protecting cultural sites. And there's some other aspects in there that we will develop further as well. So that's just a little bit different to a more housing focused or housing centric project that was initially consulted on last year. So there's that one. In the Western Corridor, there is a lot going on, but notably, I'll just pick up two things quickly. One is that we have commenced the Kenyon Road structure planning in earnest with additional resource brought on there. And we will be expecting to start to engage with our partners, with mana whenua and tangata whenua, and with the community out there in and around Kenyon Road into next year as we start to develop some of the technical work and put some plans together. We will look to take a wider focus, so looking at Kenyon Road in the context of what could be a much larger Western Corridor urban development in future. But obviously resolving some of the network challenges, particularly in the transport network, are critical to getting growth underway out there. And we continue to work with Waka Kotahi on their business case, which continues to be a wee bit of a struggle, taking a little bit longer than hoped. But there will be further updates on that in the near future. Just moving across the city into the Eastern Corridor and into Te Tumu, just make the note that there's some critical processes underway at the moment. So voting is underway as part of the Te Tumu Kaituna 14 Trust on whether or not to negotiate with TCC around infrastructure corridors, which would enable the development not just of the TK14 land, but also the wider Te Tumu urban growth area. The outcomes of that will be known pre-Christmas, and if that is positive, then we will look to re-engage that planning process in some more detail, including the wider tangata whenua engagement that is required for that project before we can get to the rezoning stage. Obviously, there's been the announcements come out last week that the IFF levy has been put in place to deliver on our TSP transport program. So I just quickly mentioned that, but that's well out there. A project that's been going on for some time with the Regional Council and through Smart Growth is a review of the natural hazard provisions in the regional policy statement, particularly the liquefaction provisions, which are setting potentially quite a higher bar around liquefaction management than in many other parts of the country, including in areas that had experienced large earthquake events like Canterbury, where there was significant liquefaction in Christchurch. So we've worked through that and come to a technical outcome where those, I guess, standards that we're working to can now be lowered, and where standard interventions through the use of the Building Act, the Building Code, and subdivision processes should in almost all cases or in most cases deliver acceptable outcomes. So that is quite a good place that we've landed on that project from our perspective, and being able to move forward with development in areas that would potentially face liquefaction and very large earthquake events. There were a couple of queries from the last meeting. Particularly, there were some queries around water. I know there's a separate waters report that Calvin and Claudia will be talking to, so I won't mention that any further. But some queries further around housing and housing shortages and housing needs moving forward that came out of the work that NZIER had done, and particularly queries around the impact of land banking, a breakdown of that sort of macro housing supply into different sectors and price points, and some points around Maori housing as well. So those are addressed in the report. We need probably a little more engagement around that housing outcome to take that one forward. We can pick that up separately. But in terms of land banking, we don't see that as a substantial issue in the city. Effectively, all of the large development sites are being developed. Some of them are very large though, and being developed in stages, which takes time, potentially quite a number of years, or in one or two cases, decades. So the pace of that development sometimes is a bit slower than we would hope. And also in some cases, the outcomes being achieved on land are certainly lower density. We think that some of the developers could push the envelope a little bit more. We don't particularly have any tools to force that, but that is something that we do see from time to time. So I will leave it there and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Andy. I've got three for you. I'll start off. So the first isn't really a question, but it's posing a question of you. When we come into next year, is it possible? We've now got really good information on which you've provided on the shortfall of houses. We know under the NPS we're 4,700 behind, and we've got several scenarios. So I think it would be quite helpful with this report to for the public to see what those are. I mean, we talk about them when we go out, but in a public document it would be quite good, and where you think we are in that scenario outlook. So that's the first thing. I know that through Smart Growth and Kāinga Tupu, they've produced some key facts and figures on the housing gap, if you like, the typology of housing, and really good information. So some of that might be helpful too, just so that as a public document, the public can get a picture of not just market housing, but across the housing spectrum. So that's the first one. Secondly, so the second question is, how do we get our updated density in that Western Corridor, which currently sits at the 2012 UFTI levels, into the modern, into today's density, which is about double, so that people like organisations like Waka Kotahi and all of those discussions are using today's data and not 2012's data. And then the third question, before you answer, is really one of the greatest risks for us is the legislation to change, to allow for the changes in the NPS ID and the definition of wetlands. And we've asked the ministers at, where that legislation is. I can't find it anywhere in the legislative program, and just wondering whether you have got any indication through MFE.
So in terms of the Western Corridor, probably the best place to bring in the updated housing potential, housing yields, is through the future development strategy. So that could indicate what the long-term full urbanisation of that corridor could be, an update from UFTI. Obviously, a lot of that would sit outside the 30-year period that the FDS is primarily focused on. But ahead of that, we are, working with Waka Kotahi around looking at the transport options for the Western Corridor and making sure they are accounting for all of the growth potential. So we've just updated them again, and they will run specific modelling around what is in AFTI. But we've also said very clearly that, since AFTI's happened, things, have changed. And while you might not run a model scenario for even greater levels of growth out there, we certainly need to take a future proofing or longevity lens to the solutions, or the options that there are, to see which would perform better if more growth were to happen out there. Yeah, so it's an ongoing discussion. In terms of the NPS Indigenous biodiversity, which I think you're referring to, we've been told for some time that should come into effect by the end of this year, and we've been advised that we can expect that still to be the case. We don't have any detail around exactly what the drafting of those provisions are, whether the concerns that we've raised, particularly with the crossover with so wetlands and the freshwater reforms, has been addressed, but our staff have been working directly with MFE on some of the issues that we've raised. So we're quite, we're hopeful that they will be picked up for that reason.
That process is critical to the Tauranga West plan change provisions, which are going to take quite some time. So, yeah, so we're keeping a close eye on that. So, okay, thank you very much. Bill.
Thanks, Chair. Andy, just going back to the commentary on land banking and acknowledge what is in the report. Notwithstanding the lack of tools, it's just using every opportunity, and whether it's through side agreements or other arrangements, in terms of the opportunity in bringing land forward or having it developed within a period of time. And previously, you guys have negotiated things with a time frame as to when land needs to be developed by. So all I'm suggesting, whilst there is a limitation, keeping all that stuff at top of mind and using those opportunities, particularly when we need to provide something, to actually try and get some of that brought forward or have defined timeframes when development is completed by. So I just wanted, it's not a question, just wanted to put that on the table.
Yeah, kia ora, Andy. Look, mine is specific to that Western Corridor, and on page 146, you sort of outlined there. You finished that paragraph by saying that there are significant concerns just with the delays. I think more so, and again, just by way of context, I might have been asleep at the wheel in some of the other entities I sit on. Can you, without finite detail, where have those pressures and concerns? Is it just the timing as to trying to pull this together and as I say, not wanting to get down into the granular stuff? Where is that bottle choke issues come about?
Thanks for the question, mate. Just so I'm just clear, you're talking about the concerns about the Waka Kotahi business case. That's correct. The transport side of things. So I mean, it's been a long-standing issue. If you look at planning for the transport solutions in the Western Corridor, the first serious investigations that I'm aware of commenced in the early 2000s, and were aligned with the development of the Lake subdivision and the Tauranga Business Estate subdivision. There were a number of significant consultant-led kind of investigations through Waka Kotahi that didn't go anywhere through the 2000s, 2010s. And probably as a result, a lot of development has happened, and a lot of transport options are now not on the table or are very expensive and probably not feasible to deliver. So we're dealing with in a situation where options have narrowed. And in 2016, when Smart Growth made decisions to proceed with the Tauranga West urban growth area, Waka Kotahi made commitments at the same time to progress with its planning and actually nail it and find a solution. And that started in 2017. We're now 5 years later, and still some way away from understanding what that solution would be, when it might be able to be developed, is it affordable, and those sorts of issues. There has been, Waka has been in a difficult space. They've faced a change of government, a significant change of government policy statement and policy direction around transport. They've had to put their project on hold, as a number of projects were put on hold. But effectively, for those reasons, we had to create the enabling works business case so we could at least get development started, keep the industrial land flowing to some extent. But we still don't have a solution that enables us to rezone Tauranga West with confidence that it can all be developed. We don't have a solution that enables all of the Tauranga business estate to be rezoned and developed with confidence. And we certainly don't have a solution that enables us to even probably build one house in Keenan Road at the moment. So we're doing a lot of our planning work and progressing that, but without Waka Kotahi moving forward on their side of things, that might not come to fruition. We've seen similar things happen up in Mokoroa, where that township developed significantly and the transport infrastructure lagged. So we're just really concerned that we don't want to see the same thing happen here. And we already know the pressures that the network is on in that area all the time. I'm lucky I don't have to drive through there too much, but I know plenty of people who do, and it's not a pretty picture.
Hence my frustration that we are still working on density figures from 2012 in consideration of those transport options. And we have to go through a process in smart growth, which has to be done by 2024. So we're still another 2 years, well, another year and a half away from getting that completed before we can get it into the modelling proper, even though we've had a piece of legislation that enables in this city 3 up and 3 down anywhere in the city. So we know density can happen anywhere in the city, but none of that is being considered by Waka Kotahi with the transport options. And it's taken so long. It's only in the 10-year plan as a business case, and that's our strong message from the region to government, is that this is holding up significant housing and industrial development in the city, and has been for 10, maybe 15 years, listening to Andy.
And I just want to reiterate, because I think it'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. And again, I sit on a number of entities connected with Tauranga West as mana whenua rep on those as well. And we mirror the same frustrations. And I keep saying this, it's a common thing I keep saying when I sit at this table in this forum, there's enormous amounts of pressure now on our people. And don't forget, a lot of them are part-time. They're not full-time home orgs they're resourced and funded and sit there every day in front of their computer to handle this. It's part-time people come in and dedicating their time and issues. And I do, from that perspective, say it's significant concern as well, without pointing fingers. And it's a certain amount of empathy. Yes, I hear what you're saying about Waka Kotahi, but at the end of the day, I can see how this is going to end, and it's going to be in a lot of pain for us all to get this thing across the line. And we will ultimately, but it'll come again at significant pressures to a lot of people involved. But I think I need to say that because I mirror and concur with the frustrations with all the stakeholders.
Yeah, I can only really say here to that discussion, and I am really concerned that we don't have an aligned process between all of our agencies here. So we've got ourselves doing our own planning, predicated on a much more significant density in the Western Corridor, and I'm really referring to that specifically. We've got Kāinga Ora doing a specified development project, which is all, and we endorse that as a council, all centred on the need to accelerate the provision of land, infrastructure and housing to address the housing crisis in the city. Yet Waka Kotahi are working on a program that takes into account old data that doesn't, on the surface at least, seem to take account of the SDP process and the potential for significant growth in that corridor. And to have to wait for the spatial planning framework process to run its course risks Waka Kotahi making a preemptive decision that is not in support of the level of intensification we're seeking in that corridor, and completely misaligns the purpose of our focus on the corridor and the need to accelerate pace and scale of development. So I think it's time for let's do a bit of a reset here and start to talk about common language about what we're seeking to achieve. What is the overarching strategy? What is the role of each of the parties in that strategy development to make sure that we have the right infrastructure and the right time to be able to open up the potential of this corridor? The reality is the failure of Waka Kotahi to deliver the infrastructure because they are constrained in funding means that Tauranga citizens who both live here and who are coming are paying house prices, exorbitant house prices, because we can't deliver the infrastructure to open up the land. So we might win the battle on penny pinching on the project, but we lose the war in terms of actually how we provide for the future growth of the city. So I think it's time to up the ante. We need to engage with our colleagues in the Western Bay to get alignment between ourselves and the future potential of that corridor. We need to align that with the KO process for the SDP, and we need to have strategic discussions with Waka Kotahi to make sure they're in the tent to deliver their part of it, because that corridor cannot be developed to its capacity without the State Highway 29 upgrade. And in my view, the offline option that is proposed is the right solution, because that will enable rapid transit from Tauriko, Pies Pa, Belt Road, Lower and Upper, the whole corridor through Cameron Road into the city and onto the mount in a dedicated public transport, walking and cycling corridor. We don't want that mixed with some sort of suboptimal solution or no solution, which is the path we're on potentially at the moment.
Serious sense of frustration around the table, but I think that's the benefit of having the quarterly updates, because nothing's changing fast, although there's a hang of a lot of work going on, and as you say, we've certainly made inroads with things like the IFF to get our share of that investment happening. But Stephen's right, we've got to get alignment of all of those partners, and so for the next quarter, that's the goal. All right, someone prepared to move that we receive the report? Bill, thank you, and Shad seconded it. Any further discussion? I think we've said it all. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Andy. City Waters Planning, 9.7, saying we've got 11 minutes till lunchtime. We need to finish this.
You might be able to squeeze it in that time. Kia ora tātou. So this paper outlines the initiatives we are working on to secure the future water supply for the city. A big part of that is to understand the state of the aquifers and to gain a system view of the supply, demand, and how sensitive it is. And also we were keen to give you an update on the various components. And Stephen, you commented on that about 3 or 4 weeks ago, why this is taking so long. So we're kind of hoping that the paper is self-explanatory. So if you're okay with that, to take it as read, and we're happy to answer any questions. I've got Claudia Hallberg here, who's leading this piece of work. Thank you.
Claudia, it's a significant piece of work of significant importance to the long-term water supplies to the city. So did you want to make any quick comments before I open it up?
I'm very happy to take questions. It's a very short, concise report, and I assume that you read it.
Yep, I'm sure we all have. Any questions for Claudia? Yep, Stephen.
Thank you, team, and thank you for the report. It is timely and it is helpful to understand why it is taking so long. So thank you, Nick. I just really want to be satisfied that we are sufficiently advanced in our planning for water for the Western Corridor, really further to the previous conversation, because we don't want any of our agencies saying, well, we're ready, why aren't you?
Yes, so how the city was applied in the past was that the coastal area was applied from the Joyce treatment plant, but with the new Waiari treatment plant going online, Tashwood, the coast system can actually be supplied with water from that end that will take off the pressure from the Joyce treatment plant. And we have got plans in place. We started to prepare 4 years ago for the Western Corridor to have holistic views of all of the growth areas. And so we are in a really good position to know what we have to do for water. But just given the new densities we are looking at now, we will have to review these plans. But it's not that we are starting from scratch. So we're in a really good position from a water perspective for water supply and wastewater.
So I guess my key question is, you don't see that as a showstopper?
No. Key part of that is that we're prepared then for the water reforms, which will transfer some of those decisions over to an entity that is not us. So we need to be very clear before that happens on what it means for us in the future. Yeah, Shad.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I did find it useful, I think, to understand all the various work streams that we're involved in. One of the matters that kind of came to mind was, and it's kind of noted in the report, was around the future planning. I think in the sub-regional long-term plan for water, and picking up on the points in the report where it notes, we've got consenting for the Oropi water supply scheme, I think 2026, and then we've got Waiari coming up in 2042. And I know that from some of the conversations that we've been having on the Waiari Kaitiaki group, some of the relationship stuff's quite challenging, and we're about to turn the tap on the Waiari scheme. But I think from my point of view, we do need to take a long-term view in terms of the relationships that we have, particularly with tangata whenua, Tapaweka and Waitaha in particular, who have a kaitiaki role and responsibility in terms of how that river is managed from their point of view. And, public infrastructure is a tangata whenua take a long-term view when we think about public works, whether it's the pipeline across the harbour, whether it's the wastewater treatment plant over in Tauranga, quarrying and all of those types of things. So we do need to take a long-term view in terms of the relationship. So, it's still 20 years out. Tangata whenua have a long memory when it comes to public works. So we do need to be thinking about, how do we manage the relationship? Our relationship's kind of been up and down, I think, in the last couple of years between ourselves and those ones in particular for the Waiari scheme. I understand the relationships are probably a little bit better when it comes to the Oropi scheme, but we do need to continue to work at that. These consenting cycles come around, we think 20 years, but for tangata whenua, it's kind of an ongoing conversation. So I suppose the point I wanted to make is that we do need to be taking a long-term view, not just in these election consenting cycles, and making sure that they're embedded. So I'll take the point, I think, in paragraph 19, where we are engaging and talking through the combined forum. When we're talking about particular water resources and schemes, they do affect those iwi and hapu in particular. I just want to encourage us that we do need to take a long-term view in terms of the relationships between ourselves and mana whenua, tangata whenua.
Maybe just comment on that. So we are really working hard to build up these relationships. And for the sub-regional study, we really would like to see them on the governance scope as well, and having all of the different areas, the east, central and western part, also talking to each other.
And then specifically for our takes, we acknowledge there are specific hapus interested in a specific area, that we also specifically engage with them as well and do this more on a holistic catchment basis. So that's really the feedback we are receiving from them. It's not just about this one take location, but it is about the whole stream and the whole health of the whole water basin.
Need to move the report. We're receiving the report. Yep, Bill. Quick. Yep.
Just in terms of the report gives a very good snapshot of what's happening, and also those longer term issues, and also highlighting the vulnerability in terms of the city supply in terms of water source. Given also the reconsenting, I just wanted to make sure we weren't taking our foot off the pedal of looking at all those initiatives that individuals, homeowners could be doing, and what we could be doing through resource consenting processes and all of that to minimise water use. Absolutely critical, and given those reconsenting processes might reduce allocations, I don't know, but all of the challenges in that space, we do need to be making sure we're doing everything else in terms of that reduction in water use by whether it's business, residential users or whatever.
Yes, so through these projects we have got listed here, so the sub-regional study will look at a water cycle city, a water sensitive city. So we will look at these scenarios where also individual behavior change is happening to really demonstrate the overarching benefits from it. And then there will, of course, be specific education needs with the community. And if we see there's a real benefit, potentially also policy changes in consenting. And through the freshwater management tool, where we have got a model, we will also look at some of these options and how they specifically have got an impact on the receiving environment. So it is part of the options we are assessing.
Can I maybe add to that also that no, we're not taking the foot off the throttle, because one of the criteria when we go through the consenting process is that we have optimized minimized utilization and optimized draw on other resources. So that is actually part of the approval process and criteria for getting those future consents. So we're absolutely leaning into that. Thank you.
Okay, moved by Bill, seconded by Wayne. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. So now we're going to adjourn the open part of the meeting. Yep. No, but I've got to adjourn the public part of the meeting because we're going to come back to it. And would someone like to move that we go into committee for the reasons outlined in the agenda? Shad and Stephen, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried.